Well, Henry David Thoreau is a hero to many Unitarian Universalists. His radical individualism, his love of nature, his skill as a writer have made him popular among religious liberals. We often refer to his writings. We tend, however, to ignore the more extreme aspects of Thoreau's philosophy. For example, in the 1840s, he suggested that walking the 18 miles from Boston to Concord was much better than taking the train. In recent years, I observed that Unitarian Universalists are embracing a modern Thoreau. Like his 19th century counterpart, Wendell Berry's radical individualism, his love of nature, and his skill as a writer have made him popular among religious liberals. Like Thoreau, Unitarian Universalists have widely quoted Berry. A simple example is the fact that 4 of his writings appear in our hymnal. And like Thoreau, religious liberals ignore the more extreme aspects of Berry's philosophy, such as his refusal to buy a computer. I want to talk about Berry today, the day after Earth Day, because I believe he represents a place where liberal and conservative thinking merge. Also, I want to talk about him because I love his writing, his prose, his poetry, and his stories. They have enriched my life. Well, Wendell Berry is a thin man, more than 6 feet tall, born in 1934 in Newcastle, Kentucky. Today, as a farmer, he works 75 acres of land near Port Royal, a town of 250 people in northern Kentucky. As a writer, he's published novels, essays, and poetry. Like Thoreau, Berry is a well-educated man. To read his writing or hear him talk, one would expect to find him more comfortable in the role of a university professor. He began his adult life as a professor, teaching first at the University of California in Berkeley, then accepting a secure position on the faculty of New York University. It was a good job in one of the great cities of the world. In New York, he met other writers, he made contacts with publishers, and he started to take part in the literary life of New York. Then, like Thoreau before him, Berry began to retreat from modern civilization. At the age of 30, he resigned his position in New York to accept a teaching post at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, 60 miles from his hometown. In 1965, while still teaching at the University of Kentucky, he started working on a farm near where he grew up while keeping his home in Lexington. And then in 1977, Berry left his teaching position and moved himself and his family to live full-time on a farm near the shores of the Kentucky River. He wrote, "We reclaimed the pastures, converted the garage into a hen house, rebuilt the barn, greatly improved the garden soil, planted berry bushes, acquired a milk cow, and were producing, except for the hay and the grain for our animals, nearly everything we ate: fruit, vegetables, eggs, meat, milk, cream, and butter. We built an outbuilding with a meat room and a food storage cellar. Because we did not want to pollute our land and water with sewage, and in the process waste nutrients that should be returned to the soil, we built a composting privy. And so we began to attempt a life that, in addition to whatever else it was, would be responsibly agricultural. We used no chemical fertilizers. Except for a little rhododendron, we used no insecticides. As our land and our food became healthier, so did we. When Thoreau went to live at Walden Pond, the more traditional members of the community called him an eccentric. Some said that he was out of touch with the real world, that he was egocentric, self-indulgent, and arrogant. What would happen to the country if everyone ran away to the pond? Asked the critics. Who would do the work required to maintain modern civilization? All these charges have also been made against Wendell Berry. Critics charge that Berry is a nostalgic writer who understands nothing about modern farming and wants to turn farming methods back at least 100 years. As evidence, they point to one of Berry's most radical suggestions, the idea that farmers abandon tractors and return to the use of horses for plowing. He wrote, "For a while I assumed I would buy a tractor of my own. But because our land was steep and there was already talk of a fuel shortage, and because I liked the idea, I finally decided to buy a team of horses instead." By the spring of 1973, after a lot of inquiring and looking, I had found and bought a team of 5-year-old mares. Though I had worked horses and mules during the time I was growing up, I had never worked over steep ground so steep and problematical as this. And it had been 20 years since I had worked a team over ground of any kind. Getting started again, I anticipated every new task with uneasiness, sometimes with dread. But to my relief and delight, the team and I did all that needed to be done that year, getting better as we went along. And over the years since then, with that team and others, my son and I have carried on our farming the way it was carried on in my boyhood, doing everything with our horses except baling the hay. And we have done work in places and in weather in which a tractor would have been useless. Experience has shown us, or re-shown us, that horses are not only a satisfactory and economical means of power, especially on such small places as ours, but are probably necessary to the most conservative use of steep land. But we're accustomed to thinking of industrialized farming with its chemical fertilizers, its hybrid seeds, and its gasoline-driven tractors, that's the best in the world. Berry calls this assumption into question. He writes, "Our dilemma in agriculture now is that the industrial methods that have so spectacularly solved some of the problems of food production have been accompanied by side effects so damaging as to threaten the survival of farming. For example, the weight of tractors year after year creates a problem with soil compaction. The industrial solution to this problem is to get a bigger, more powerful tractor to break up the soil. Over time, this solution further compacts the soil. This creates the need for still a bigger tractor, and so on. The return to the use of horsepower in farming is Berry's answer. He writes, "I do not believe in the efficiency of big solutions. I believe that they not only tend to prolong and complicate the problems they are meant to solve, but that they cause new problems. On the other hand, if the solution is small, obvious, simple, and cheap, then it may quickly and permanently solve the immediate problem and many others as well. For example, if a city dweller walks or rides a bicycle to work, he has found the simplest solution to his transportation problem. And at the same time, he's reduced pollution, reducing the waste of natural resources, reducing the public expenditure for traffic control, saving his money, and improving his health. We must learn to think of human energy, our energy, not as something to be saved, but as something to be used and enjoyed in use. We must understand that our strength is, first of all, strength of the body, and that this strength cannot thrive except in useful, decent, satisfying work. There is no such thing as potential bodily energy. By saving it, as our ideals of labor saving and luxury bid us to do, we simply waste it, and waste much else along with it. It is a radically conservative argument touching the roots of human life. Berry raises questions about how we eat, how we work, how we use our bodies. He is conservative in that he calls for a return to cultural values that we see most clearly in the small American family farm of 100 years ago. Growing our own food, unlike buying it, is a complex activity, and it affects deeply the shape and values of our lives. We like the thought that the outdoor work that improves our health should produce food of excellent quality. That in turn also improves and safeguards our health. We like no less the thought that the home production of food can improve the quality of family life. Not only do we intend to give our children better food than we can buy for them at the store, or that they can buy for themselves from vending machines or burger joints, we also know that growing and preparing food at home can provide family work for everybody. And by thus elaborating household chores and obligations, we hope to strengthen the bonds of interest, locality, affection, and cooperation that keep families together. But Berry then admits that his own attempts to raise his children in this way do not meet with complete success. He writes, "According to my own observation, one of the likeliest results of a wholesome diet of home-raised, home-cooked food is a heightened relish for Cokes and hot dogs. And if you deprive your children of TV at home, they are going to watch it with something like rapture away from home. If your children spurn your healthy meals in favor of those concocted by some reincarnation of Colonel Sanders, Long John Silver, or the royal family of Burger, if they flee from books to a friend's house to watch TV, if your old-fashioned notions and ways embarrass them in front of their friends, Does that mean you are a failure? It may. And what parent has not considered that possibility? I know at least that I have considered it and have wailed and gnashed my teeth, found fault, laid blame, preached, and ranted. But I have thought, too, that the term of human judgment is longer than parenthood, that the upbringing we give our children is not just for their childhood, but for all their lives. And it is surely the duty of the older generation to be embarrassingly old-fashioned. For the claims of the newness of the younger generation are mostly frivolous. The real failure is giving in. If we make our home a household instead of a motel, provide healthy nourishment for mind and body, enforce moral distinctions and restraints, teach essential skills and disciplines, and require their use, there is no certainty that we are providing our children a better life that they will embrace wholeheartedly during childhood. But we are providing them a choice that they may make more intelligently as adults. But then there can be moments with children that are special. Wendell wrote in 1988, "Last December, when my granddaughter, Kate, had just turned 5, she stayed with me one day while the rest of the family was away from home. In the afternoon, we hitched a team of horses to the wagon and hauled a load of dirt for the barn floor. It was a cold day, but the sun was shining. We hauled our load of dirt over the tree-lined gravel lane beside the creek, a way well known to her mother and to my mother when they were children. And we went along. As we went along, Kate, 5 years old, drove the team of horses for the first time in her life. She did very well, and she was proud of herself. She said that her mother would be proud of her, and I said that I was proud of her. We completed our trip to the barn, unloaded our load of dirt, smoothed it over the barn floor, and weighed it down. By the time we started back up the creek road, the sun had gone over the hill, and the air had turned bitter. Kate sat close to me in the wagon, and we did not say anything for a long time. I didn't say anything because I was afraid that Kate was not saying anything, because she was cold and tired and miserable and perhaps homesick. It was impossible to hurry too much, and I was unsure how I would comfort her. But then, after a while, she said, "Wendell, isn't it fun?" In 1980, I had dinner with Wendell Berry and a man named Tim Taylor. I was minister in Lexington, Kentucky. Tim was a friend of Wendell's and a Unitarian Universalist, a member of my congregation. We ate at the faculty club at Eastern Kentucky University. Now, after having read Wendell's essays, I wondered if for dinner he might brown bag it, bringing along perhaps an apple and some homemade bread and a few raw carrots from the farm. Actually, the first thing ordered was Kentucky bourbon whiskey. And then we ate a meal of beef, vegetables, and potatoes. I was quiet most of the evening, listening to the conversation. It was farming talk. "What's the best way to keep seed out of a horse's ears when you're sowing a field?" asked Wendell. "Put socks on its ears," Tim said. Now, my parents raised me in a city. I've lived in cities all my life. I've had limited success with gardens. I greatly admire Wendell Berry, the life he lives about and which he writes, but I admire it from a long way off, from the comfort of my city home and my store-bought food. I know my ignorance when it comes to farming. If I followed Wendell's example and traded my pulpit for a plow, I would have a lifetime of skills to learn. Sometimes I dream of retiring from the ministry to care for an apple orchard. But I did plant 2 apple trees 30 years ago, and they both died. Nevertheless, I am glad Wendell is out there, farming and writing. His words challenge me to think. They touch my soul. They renew my spirit. He reminds me of the critical importance of the farmer to all human life. If Wendell has done nothing else with his novels, his poetry, and essays, he's raised the respect by which people hold the family farm. He reminds us of the obvious fact that although we do not all grow food, we all eat food. If we look down on those who grow the food we eat, we are fools. Because of Berry, I see the farm and the farmer with new understanding. I smell the corn, the oats, and the soil with new reverence. I have a deeper regard for those men and women living out their lives on small, widely scattered farms across our nation. So after our dinner several years ago, I sat in the audience as Wendell gave a lecture to several hundred university students on the Bible and ecological responsibility. How can you love your neighbor if you do not know how to keep your filth out of his water supply and your poison out of his air? He asked the students. After the lecture, in the car on the way back to Tim's house, I asked Wendell to speak at my church in Lexington, Kentucky on a Sunday morning. Now, perhaps it was the whiskey, perhaps it was Wendell's friendship with Tim, but I think it was probably because Wendell's mother-in-law was a member of the congregation. He said yes. He did agree to speak at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. And when he spoke in the fall of 1980, it was to the largest gathering in the history of the church. It is fitting and appropriate that we raise these issues in our churches because the question of our relationship between our bodies and the earth is ultimately a religious question. Wendell Berry suggests our interaction with the earth is an act of religious communion, not unlike the breaking of bread and the sharing of wine. His words on this are good words with which to conclude. He wrote, "To live, we must daily break the body and shed the blood of creation. When we do it greedily, clumsily, ignorantly, destructively, it is a desecration. When we do this lovingly, knowingly, skillfully, reverently, it is a sacrament."